Well, good morning, everyone, out there in your homes, in your offices, and here, of course, in the room. I'm Frank Montag. I'm looking for my slides. There they are. Okay, wonderful. Perfect. Now, first of all, thanks to Pablo and Alfonso for having invited me to this anniversary conference. 10 years of the blog, have all made us a little bit more hipster than we were. Well done, guys. But there's another important anniversary this year, which I would like to talk about, and that's the 30th anniversary of the European Merger Control Regulation. And this 30th anniversary inspired me to the subtitle of my talk, "Hey dude, for Pete's sake, you are 30. It's no longer cute to be so disorganized. Grow up and focus on the essentials." Now let me just see how I can move this forward. Perhaps this way, no, this. Okay, there we go. So, is the merger control process spiraling out of control? I look at the old days, when the merger control regulation came into force, and I was there already at the time. I've not been as long in the business as Johan Isewin, who said last year at this place that he had started in 1932, but I was there early enough to be a heavy user of the European merger control regulation, to have been involved in many cases, so I kind of consider myself somewhat qualified to contrast the past and the present. And perhaps before I start on this, I also want to tell you what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about, at least not much, about Siemens Alstom. I'm not going to talk about the Chinese threat to European competition. I'm not going to talk about the desire to create European champions and the Franco-German, Polish, and the Franco-German manifestos and all of the other great ideas which are floating around to make European merger control better. But I am going to focus on the process. So, going back to one of my early cases, Nestlé Perrier. That was a time which I would characterize by the words more inspiration than transpiration. Why is that? It was a complex second phase case. Today we would say coordinated effects. At the time we called it joint dominance, with remedies. There were two commission officials investigating this case, the case manager Gerd Strauss and the case handler Emil Paulus. The more experienced ones among you will remember those names. There were two lawyers, my then senior partner Joachim Sedemund and me, acting for the notifying party. And in the second phase, but only late in the second phase, we hired an economist, Bill Bishop, and I think it was his first case. Now, when it came to access to the file, I went to Emil Paulus's office in DG Comp, DG4 at the time, and he was sitting behind his desk, and he was saying to me, pointing at the shelves behind his desk, and he was saying, "There's the file, help yourself." And that was access to the file at the time. Today we get, of course, a CD-ROM, and I'm very happy that I have dozens of associates who are now looking at these files. Now, fast forward to 2019. Same case, just imagine. Minimum, I assure you, 10 commission officials plus members of the chief economist teams. Today, both parties would have lawyers, 10 each minimum because of all the internal documents, etc., and we would have two economist teams. The Form COs have become an encyclopedia of entire industries. And in addition to long-form COs, I've mentioned here Siemens Alstom, 1,200 pages. I could have mentioned Bayer Monsanto, which I understand had more than 2,000 pages. So in addition to these encyclopedias about entire industries, we also have to submit 5.4 documents, all kinds of annexes, Siemens Alstom again, 60,000 pages, and we have to submit internal documents, in that case 475,000 for Siemens alone. I mentioned a few other cases here, ArcelorMittal, 800,000 documents, Qualcomm NXP, 1 million documents, and Bayer Monsanto, 2.7 million documents. Again, Bayer Monsanto on top of the list. And on top of all of this, we have these RFIs, sometimes more than 100 RFIs in a case, with each of them sometimes more than 100 questions. Now you can do the maths, and you will end up with the result that today it's really more about transpiration than inspiration. This has actually even caught Donald Trump's attention because allegedly he sees the burdensome merger control process as yet another brutal way how this tax lady who hates the US is mishandling US companies. And indeed, there are a lot of people who say, if you look at the merger process today, we have a combination of the worst elements of two systems. The worst elements of the front-loaded European merger control system with a long, comprehensive notification, and the back-loaded US system where you have a second request with lots of internal documents to be produced. This combination of the worst elements of both systems have led to much, much longer investigation periods, in particular, very, very long pre-notification. Just think about cases like GE Alstom, Bayer Monsanto, Siemens Alstom, Halliburton Baker Hughes, ThyssenKrupp Tata, and so forth. And on top of all of this, the Commission, at least at times, imposes significant fines for unintentionally, negligently providing insufficient or incomplete evidence. Think about Facebook and General Electric. Now, how did we get here? The older ones among you will remember that around the turn of the century, in the late 90s, there was a lot of criticism from lawyers and economists, in particular from the United States, about the test, the dominance test, which was in the original merger control regulation, because it couldn't really deal with what we called the gap cases. Now, by 2004, this had led to a change in the legislation because of the more economic approach, and we introduced the significant impediment of effective competition test, which changed the way we are looking at things today. If you look at decisions, they're basically all on the basis of unilateral effects. Very rarely coordinated effects are being used as a theory of harm, despite a certain renaissance. Second development, Mark van der Woude already mentioned some of these cases. The Commission lost spectacularly in the court of first instance a number of merger cases, Airto's First Choice, Tetra Laval, Schneider Legrand, and then later Sony BMG. And especially the first three increased the standard which the Commission had to meet and the burden of proof for their cases when they wanted to prohibit a merger. So the consequence of these developments, new test, plus the requirements which the court had imposed, was deeper analysis was required. And in order to do deeper analysis in merger cases, what do you need? You need more economic data, and you need internal documents. And in order to deal with all of this, the Commission created the chief economist team, which would help the case teams to look at this additional data. We should also not forget that over the last 15 years or so, there was another external development, namely, because of globalization, we have seen more complex transactions with hundreds of affected markets. Think about agrochemicals. It started with Bayer, Aventis, Crop Science, where there were already roughly 300 affected markets, and then there are other cases like Dow DuPont, like Bayer Monsanto. We had Holcim Lafarge, we had pharma cases, we had mobility cases like Siemens Alstom, where there were also around 100 affected markets. So things have become much more complex. And things have also become much more costly. As we all know, today companies pay millions, sometimes tens of millions of euros for lawyers, economists, IT specialists, let alone the opportunity cost, let alone the disruption for the ordinary course of their business. So, significantly longer investigations at much higher cost for companies and at much higher cost for the European Commission as well. So if we all agree today the costs are higher, is the outcome any better? Again, Mark van der Woude referred to longer decisions. And if you just look over the past 15 years, then you can see that the average decision in 2004, second phase decision, was 111 pages. And by 2018, it had reached 301 pages. Now, that's certainly a good thing because it shows more analysis and deeper thought. But is this really so? Are the cases decided in a better way? Is the outcome any better today than it used to be 30 years ago? Is it more thorough, more sophisticated? Would the remedies in Nestlé Perrier have been different if it had been done today? I submit that in many cases we see a lot of unnecessary detail distracting really from the core issues in these decisions. And many of you who have been in these cases know that partially first the SO and then the decision consists of copy-paste pieces from either the Form CO or from certain responses to RFIs. Now, here you see me, or rather, you see what my niece thinks about me when I'm in despair of the situation. I try to tear out my hair only to find that I had lost it over 30 years of work in the merger control field. A little bit like Jorge, even though he's, of course, 50 years younger than I am. So, quo vadis merger control? What can we do now that merger control has turned 30. I listed here a few ideas which we could think about. So the first one is, why not eliminate pre-notification for straightforward cases? Why not go straight to notification? We are all experienced lawyers. We know what a straightforward case is, and why not do that? And actually, I've done this in the past, in the distant past, when the Commission still allowed it. Then for the more complex cases, how about reducing the burden of the notification? We could have really short notifications, perhaps in the vein of the HSR filings, or something similar to what the Bundeskartellamt admits, and then submit the 5.4 documents, or as they say in the US, the 4C documents. Why should we actually be required to use Form CO or short Form CO? If you want, you can, but the Commission should make it voluntary. Then, once the preliminary investigation phase has started, I think it would be very useful, rather than sending around lots of written RFIs, for the Commission's case teams to pick up the phone, to talk to customers in particular, but also to competitors, and they would find out very quickly from having talked to a number of people where the issues are in a particular case. And then, and only then, start asking for internal documents and RFIs, really targeting on the markets with competition issues. Limit the number of custodians in your documents request. Work on more targeted search terms. Let's also be more practicable about privilege logs. Why do we actually need a fully reasoned 6-month C decision? Couldn't this just be another procedural step, which would then, of course, bind much less resources in DG Comp? How could we improve operations in DG Comp? Could there be a better mix of more senior and junior members of case teams to increase the experience levels and thereby allowing for better focalization on the important core issues? How about improving the industry knowledge of case teams? There are a number of things one could use in order to get there, a number of ways to achieve this. Now, all of this requires changes of the merger regulation, the implementing regulation, the best practice guidelines, and also, to some extent, the operation of DG Comp. But hey, we are in a world where everything changes, even the climate changes, so it must be possible to make merger control more efficient. And if you think this is all very revolutionary and outrageous, let me finish with an anecdote, but a true one. You know, years ago, I found a letter in one of the files of one of my clients. It was a letter from the former competition, or then competition commissioner, Frans Andriessen, to the PDG, the CEO of Pont-à-Mousson, a French company subject to the ECSC treaty. And the letter, and it's a liberal translation from French into English, went approximately like this. Dear Francis, I refer to our excellent lunch last Tuesday, during which you orally notified the joint venture between Pont-à-Mousson and somebody else. I herewith authorize the transaction under Article 66, paragraph 1, ECSC Treaty, and I look forward to our next lunch. Very truly yours, France. So, this was the old days, and this is not a joke. I have seen this letter. It has happened in the early 80s. I'm not proposing that we go back to that time, but I'm proposing that we, now that the EU merger control process has turned 30, that we find a way which is more focused and more measured than in the past few years. Thank you very much.